The Assyrian Empire. Close your eyes for a moment and let your mind drift to a place lost in the dust of time. Imagine vast stone walls stretching as far as the eye can see, towers looming high above the plains. The sun hangs low, casting a golden light that dances across the sandstone, illuminating the city of Nineveh, the heart of an empire unmatched in power, ambition, and fear. To Nineveh, just the sound of it could shake men to their bones. This was the beating heart of Assyria, a place where kings reigned with iron hands and silver tongues, where warriors trained under the harsh gaze of the desert sun, their faces set in grim determination. In the streets, merchants bartered spices from distant lands, slaves toiled in silence, and everywhere, there was the unmistakable air of dominance. The empire's borders stretched farther than the mind could fathom. From the sands of Egypt to the mountains of Persia, the Assyrians cast their shadow over all. But what was it that made this empire so powerful? That, my friends, is where our story truly begins. The Assyrians were no ordinary rulers. They were warriors, trained from childhood to fight, to conquer, to dominate. And their leaders, they were something else entirely. Men like Ashur-Nisirpal, Tiglath-Pileser. These were no mere kings. They were giants among men, feared and revered in equal measure. When they marched, they didn't merely conquer, they obliterated. Cities that dared to resist were reduced to ashes, their people scattered or taken as slaves, and those who remained, let's just say they learned quickly not to stand in the way of the Assyrians. They ruled not with kindness, not with diplomacy, but with sheer unrelenting force, and in this way they became invincible. At least, so they believed. But even as Nineveh's walls rose higher, there were those who began to question the empire's foundations. You see, for all its might, Assyria was a land plagued by its own darkness. Underneath the wealth, the power, the splendor of its cities, there was a hidden rot. Political struggles simmered just below the surface. Noble families grew envious, hungry for a piece of the empire's glory. Generals, once loyal, began to whisper to one another, plotting, waiting, and all the while the oppressed peoples of the empire, the Babylonians, the Medes, the Elamites, nursed their own wounds, remembering every act of brutality, every injustice, every life lost to the Assyrian war machine. But the kings, they were blind to it all. Blinded by their own strength, their own arrogance, they believed themselves untouchable, unstoppable. They had forgotten the lessons of history, that the higher one rises, the farther one has to fall. And so, as Nineveh gleamed in the desert sun, a coalition was brewing in the shadows. Old rivals were joining forces, ancient enemies, united by a common goal. Babylonians, Medes, Scythians, all sworn to one purpose, to tear down the empire that had cast its shadow over them for so long. And these weren't mere enemies, they were men and women with a fire in their hearts, a fire that had smoldered under years of oppression, a fire that now threatened to consume Assyria whole. But the Assyrians were proud, unyielding. They scoffed at the rumors of rebellion, dismissed the stories of armies gathering at their borders. They had their walls, their warriors, their gods. What was there to fear? Little did they know, the gods had already turned their backs on Nineveh. The city's golden age was fading, slipping away like sand through a clenched fist. And so as the year 612 BC dawned, the coalition marched from the hills, from the deserts, from the hidden places where anger and hatred had been left to fester. They came. Like a storm gathering on the horizon, their numbers grew. And as they drew closer, the people of Nineveh felt, perhaps for the first time, a flicker of fear. The Assyrian eagle, once the proudest symbol of their empire, began to feel the weight of mortality. In the city, life continued as usual, but with a strange, tense quiet. Merchants watched the horizon as they traded. Mothers whispered words of comfort to their children. And the soldiers, they stood tall, but in their eyes, there was a glint of something uncertain, something vulnerable. And so, with every step the coalition took, with every mile they crossed, The walls of Nineveh seemed to shrink just a little more. The storm had arrived. The coalition Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians stood at the gates of Nineveh, united in purpose, driven by a fury that had brewed for generations. They gathered outside those towering walls, walls that once seemed as eternal as the mountains themselves, walls that now trembled at the presence of an enemy, forged in hatred, in vengeance. Inside the city, a heavy silence weighed upon the air. The proud Assyrian soldiers, once feared by all, held their weapons tightly, hands slick with sweat. The people of Nineveh, huddled within their homes, felt a creeping dread gnawing at their hearts. There was no escaping what lay ahead. They could feel it. The empire was like a fortress made of sand, and the tide was rising. The coalition began their assault, siege engines, battering rams, the thunder of thousands of feet marching in unison, all combined to shake the very earth beneath Nineveh. For months, they struck again and again, relentless as wolves circling wounded prey. The Assyrians, valiant though they were, could only hold them off for so long. And then, as if fate itself had intervened, the heavens opened, storms raged across the plains, torrents of rain falling in sheets. The Tigris River, usually a gentle lifeline, swelled under the deluge, rising higher and higher until it crashed against the walls of Nineveh, turning its might against the very people who had once worshipped it. The river breached the walls, flooding the city, tearing apart the Assyrians' last defenses, as if nature herself had decided that their time was up. The coalition forces surged through the broken walls, a flood of their own, pouring into Nineveh. What followed was chaos, destruction, the end of a world. The Assyrian soldiers fought with all the ferocity they could muster, but the coalition was like an unstoppable wave, sweeping through the city, consuming everything in its path. The people of Nineveh saw their empire, their lives, unravel before their eyes. They ran through the streets, seeking shelter where there was none. Mothers held their children close, whispering prayers to gods who could no longer hear them. Warriors stood their ground. Though they knew it was futile, their faces hardened not with hope, but with a grim acceptance of fate. And then, in the heart of the city, where once kings had sat in splendor, where the halls had echoed with the music of victory and the whispers of court intrigue, there was only silence. When the sun rose over Nineveh the next day, it rose over ruins. The city was unrecognizable, a smoldering shell, its grand palaces and temples reduced to rubble. Smoke rose to the heavens, the final offering of a fallen empire. And as the coalition forces departed, leaving behind the silent remains of what was once the most feared empire in the world, it was as if the Assyrians had never been. All that power, all that glory, vanished in a single devastating blow. Nineveh lay quiet, a ghost city haunted by the echoes of its own grandeur. And with that, the Assyrian Empire, once believed to be eternal, was no more. There is a lesson in the ashes of Nineveh, a lesson that stretches across the centuries, whispering to each new generation, no matter how powerful, no matter how vast, every empire, every kingdom, every fortress built by human hands must one day face its end.